Can you see the slides?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm Ruth Anderson and I'm a counselling psychologist working in the Red Cell Haematology, Psychology and Counselling Service. And I'm here to talk to you about psychological well-being and psychological support in thalassemia. So I've got some slides to share with you today, and then I'll allow some time for questions or feedback at the end. So just in terms of how I'm breaking the presentation down today, I wanted to talk a bit about some of the key challenges in thalassemia. I wanted to talk about thalassemia and psychological distress, and then the role of psychological support. And then I'm going to give a case study and talk to you a little bit about somebody that I've worked with, so an anonymised case study. And then just to talk a little bit about the role of patient as teacher and how we might work to strengthen the therapeutic relationship. And then I'll end just by letting you know what our service offers at UCLH, and then we'll move on to questions. So just to start off, I've got this diagram here showing some of the key challenges that there can be with ill health and with thalassemia. And so if we start with the squares here in the light blue, which are more to do with the physical health aspect. So of course, I'm sure, you know, you're well aware of the multiple health issues as a result of both the condition and treatment, and physical symptoms such as pain and extreme fatigue and the physical incapacity that can come. Of course, it's a lifelong and unremitting condition that requires ongoing interactions with healthcare professionals and health services. And the treatment side of things, the treatment burden, it can be very demanding and intensive and complex, with significant side effects, and also a constant reminder of having the condition and perhaps feeling different to other people who don't need to come into hospital, for example, on a regular basis. And then with the sort of the light green squares here, I've thought a bit about the psychological aspect of the condition. So there's something about living with uncertainty and a lack of predictability. So you know, not knowing exactly what might be happening, not knowing what kind of treatment that you might need, and the impact that might have in terms of perhaps feeling that you have less control over what's going on, and a need to kind of adjust and to adapt to living with this condition and how it might change over time. And then in the yellow squares, I've put some of the possible relational impact that having the condition might have. And I mentioned that a feeling of difference might be there, perhaps of not feeling accepted by peers. There might be an impact on relationships and on family life. There might also be a fear of rejection that might come along with disclosure of the condition, or discrimination or stigma in relation to having the condition. And that might lead people to wanting to withdraw from others and perhaps to isolate themselves from others. And then also there's the employment and financial consequences, so the impact that it might have on ability to study or ability to work, and the financial constraints or considerations that might come along with that. So these are just some of the possible challenges that there might be. Of course, it's going to be very different for every person, each individual person, as to what they might find challenging in relation to their condition. And so in terms of thalassemia and psychological distress, of course, serious illness can be a trigger for emotional distress and uncomfortable feelings. And there could be all kinds of feelings that somebody might have at different points. It could be anxiety or fear, anger, hopelessness, sadness, resentment, grief, shame. And like all of us, find different ways of coping to try and manage some of the difficult feelings that we might have. And I just wanted to break down some of the ways that all of us might try and cope with physical illness or with a situation that we find difficult. So, you know, one thing we might do is normalize things. So we might acknowledge the symptoms and normalize them in order to sort of reduce the worry and neutralize the threat that they might present. Sometimes we might deny the symptoms or the illness or the threat, and in the short term, you know, that could be helpful in terms of allowing somebody to come to terms more gradually. But over the longer term, it can pose a lot of difficulties in terms of getting appropriate treatment and care for the individual and the family and the healthcare team. Then avoidance might be a way that we cope. So we might want to avoid potential triggers to the extent that our quality of life is quite restricted. We might be fearful of our condition, and so constrain ourselves and constrain what we do and not really allow ourselves to take part in a lot of day-to-day activities. And sometimes our avoidance might be so extreme that we don't want to talk with others about our illness or any fears that we might have about that. We might not want to go there at all in conversation. Another way of coping might be resignation. So to become very preoccupied with the illness, to see it as the most important element in our life, and to see the future as being perhaps without a lot of hope. So there might be some resignation, there might be a sense of hopelessness, and that might actually increase the level of incapacity over time, and we might feel that we need to depend very much on others rather than being able to help ourselves. And then another way is accommodation. So that would be where somebody had got to the point of being able to acknowledge and respond and to actively manage their symptoms and their illness and their treatment. And that might help them to overall limit the toll that it takes on their quality of life. So it's trying to maintain a level of normalcy, but also engaging with the different aspects of treatment, but also being able to focus on other important things in life as well, alongside having a condition. So those are some of the possible ways that somebody might cope with having thalassemia or having other types of chronic illness or acute illness. And so, you know, just in terms of the research, we know that rates of anxiety and depression and mental health issues are high in the thalassemia population, and we know that if we are depressed or anxious, that increases our distress, and it might also increase our pain intensity as well. And in terms of psychological support, so in terms of what I might do as a psychologist, and also, you know, what everyone might be able to do to some extent. So there's something about being able to validate somebody's experience, to be able to sit down with them and to kind of get some clarity perhaps on what's going on. Part of that might be accessing and expressing some of those more difficult feelings that I was talking about, and feeling that it's okay to have those feelings and to be able to express those, and to kind of realise that there might be a whole bunch of feelings that are coexisting alongside each other. And then something about recognising and validating maybe the different parts of ourselves, or the different impulses that different parts of us might have, that we might want to avoid things, another part of us might want to engage. So it's kind of quite a complex picture. And then we might want to work on building on somebody's strengths, or what could be called power resources. So to really take a look at some of the things that might be able to help them to cope. And then there's that idea, back to that idea of accommodation that I mentioned before. So the idea of being able to acknowledge and respond and actively manage the condition, and also to be able to focus on other important aspects of their lives as well. So the idea is that by providing people with some psychological support, we might be able to add to their box of coping and self-management strategies. We might be able to add to their kind of self-management toolkit. It might help them to adhere to treatment if that's something that they've been finding difficult. If they do increase their coping and self-management strategies, and if they do feel less anxious and less low in mood, then it might mean that their pain intensity reduces, that they might be able to lower their levels of pain medication. It could mean then that they don't need to attend hospital in terms of acute admissions as frequently. And it might also help them to feel listened to, acknowledged, and therefore it might reduce any tension and conflict within a healthcare setting and on a wider scale in their day-to-day lives. So I wanted just to present a short case study at this point, just to talk about somebody that sought psychological support. And so it's somebody in their 20s with transfusion-dependent thalassemia. I'm going to call her Zainab. That's of course not their real name. So they've attended their transfusions, but they're not regularly taking chelation therapy. And so during our time together, we've begun to explore her experience of living with this condition since she was a child. So I'm just going to talk through some of the different areas that we've covered in our time together and where we might be getting towards. So in terms of childhood experience, we explored the way in which she was able to somehow avoid her condition or sideline her condition when she was younger, as she felt that her parents took care of everything for her and she was encouraged to lead a normal life. And as part of our time, we have spoken about her experience of the healthcare system, and she said that her experience at UCLH has been very good, but that she has had bad experiences in the past at a previous hospital where she did not feel listened to and did not think that the healthcare team were always acting in her best interests. And she also spoke about the very grueling nature of the treatment regime and spoke about the time in the past before she could take chelation in tablet form and all the kind of complexity that went along with trying to manage her condition. And now as an adult, she described the amount of what she calls admin time it takes to manage her condition, and said that sometimes she doesn't want to do this and instead wants to focus her time and energy on her very challenging and enjoyable career and on life outside of the hospital. And so I guess there's this, she knows cognitively, she kind of knows rationally perhaps what she needs to do to maintain her physical health, but there's also a very strong feeling within her that she doesn't want to comply with all of the treatment. So we've explored how she's got off track with her medication and has felt very bad about this, but has pushed those feelings away rather than yet being able to get back on track. So in terms of her relationship with her condition, she very much sees it as a nuisance, as something that she doesn't want to have to really deal with. And while her coming in and having transfusions seem necessary in order to alleviate fatigue, and there's an immediate effect from them, they said that the chelation tablets are a daily reminder or poke that she has this condition that won't go away, and she doesn't feel immediately better after taking them. And therefore, she's somehow built up this sense that she could somehow do without them. we spoke about, you know, the possible risks in thinking like that, and how that might be, you know, quite a dangerous game to play. And in terms of ways of coping, these are ways of coping that I was talking about earlier. So there's that sense of denial that I've just spoken about, or avoidance, and also a sense of resignation or hopelessness, that no matter what she does, you know, she can never do perfectly at her condition, and it will always be there. It might get worse. And so it was described as kind of like a mist that gets everywhere and can't be contained, can't be got rid of. And another way that they described, that they found, of coping is being very self-contained, being very independent, and kind of building up their own kind of castle that they can retreat into. And that might be a reaction against having to come in and being exposed and sort of poked and prodded, I guess, as part of her treatment. So we've spoken about the ways in which these adaptations to her condition have been helpful. We spoke about the ways in which they might be less helpful, and whether she might be able to be more flexible in choosing whether or not to adopt them, and whether she might be able to sort of invite other people in a bit more, whether that's family or friends, and you know, reach out to ask for support, or, you know, reach out and consider her feelings. So this is, I guess it's a work in progress, and it's an example of some of the areas that I've covered with somebody that I've been working with. And so I guess in terms of thinking about psychological input, a psychologically informed model of care is not just for those who are severely distressed and might need a referral to a psychology service or for a specialist practitioner. You know, it is something that everyone can integrate into their work. And I think there can be a risk of conflict and misunderstandings when feelings aren't acknowledged. And I think, you know, sometimes patients can get labelled as being kind of particularly difficult. And I guess it's thinking, well, there's in a very difficult situation and there are difficult feelings that somebody might be experiencing, and that they might be needing some attention and needing to be listened to. So I guess trying to identify why somebody might be behaving or feeling the way that they do, and that this is more likely to be possible in the context of a caring and respectful interaction in which the patient feels valued and able to talk and to be listened to. And so I've included a quote here, this from a study. This is actually a study from patients who have sickle cell, but it's something about the knowledge of disease that people have through their lived experience. And I've included a quote here from somebody, which says, "You get a basic knowledge of it from just living. I know how to start my own IV. I know how to take my own blood pressure. I know what hemoglobin means. I know what my counts are, ferritin levels. I know all these different terminologies from experience, because you have to know in order to keep your health together." So there's something about, you know, which of course varies from person to person, but some people may very much feel that they're an expert on their condition. And then I guess harking back to what I was just saying, I guess what I've been saying throughout about listening, and this is another quote, because if you listen to the patient and give the patient respect, what you're actually doing is helping that person take responsibility for their own health. They are also in control of the healing process and are involved somehow. So there's the idea of allowing somebody to feel that they have more control in a situation where they may feel that they have very little control. And just something on the importance of the therapeutic relationship. which I've already touched on in terms of the patient-centred care and trying to establish a collaborative and warm relationship between the person with the condition and the healthcare professional, which of course can be extremely challenging in an acute care setting. There's a lack of time and a lack of space. I guess it's about thinking what can be done in terms of being professional but also being human. And I've listed a few things here that I've taken from a bit of research on improving therapeutic relationships in acute healthcare settings. So something about taking time if we can. There's listening again, responsiveness, respect, relating as equals, empathy and compassion, and some kind of genuineness or honesty as well. So I've rattled through quite quickly there my presentation. I wanted to just clarify in terms of what we do offer. So we offer some inpatient, predominantly outpatient work. And then there's individual psychology, mental health and risk assessments, one-to-one therapy, family and couple work, things around staff consultation and liaison, some support and involvement in the person's care plans, and then liaison and referral to other services, because it may be that they have a more specific presenting issue that would be better served by another service other than our own, or they may want some ongoing support rather than shorter term support, and so we would try and signpost them to some of that. So I've reached the end there of my presentation. If anybody had any questions, reflections or feedback at all.
Has anybody got anything they want to go over, like someone they've had experience with?
Yeah, if anybody had experience that they wanted to share.
Everyone's gone quiet.
Hi Ruth, I work in Oxford. We're quite a low prevalence area for children and young people with thalassemia, but I mean compliance with medication is a really common problem for people with any chronic illness. I just wondered, is there any sort of resources that you would signpost us to use as nurses that we could use with, or share with our patients, because sometimes we refer to psychology or and they either have to wait for a little bit to access that service, or sometimes they're not really able to engage with it or don't really want to engage with it. So I just wondered, is there anything that you could advise us to use or share or sort of signpost our patients to, particularly teenagers, I think, are the sort of problem group, aren't they, a lot of the time?
Yeah, definitely. I think younger people, it can be very difficult to engage with all of it alongside everything else that demands their attention. There are no specific resources that I can think of off the top of my head, but I can certainly go back and have a look, and then I can send them over to Chris, and perhaps he could disseminate them.
Yeah, that would be really good. Yeah, thank you. I mean, because there's lots of, I suppose, places we can signpost people to help with their sort of well-being and cope with, health problems, isn't there? Like, there's lots of resources on Mind, for instance, but I just wondered if there was anything that you'd found, oh yeah, that really worked, but it's probably quite individual, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and I guess it's something though specific around, compliance with this particular type of medication, but I can also find out if fellow psychologists have come across anything or have created anything that they use.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, previously with my cohort, we've used a lot of play specialist input, but at the same time, when they're on Desferal and they're on the subcut infusions, I don't think any amount of play or prep work that they can do is gonna prepare the child to have a needle coming at them.
Yeah.
And leaving it for the parents, because I think you probably hear the same as me, but when parents are saying they have to hold their child down to do it, and it's not the greatest.
No, and I suppose it's difficult, and especially in the younger ones, I don't really understand why, do they? So that's a whole different ball game in terms of psychological support.
I mean, there's one lad that I know who's done quite well. Like he's a dreamboat when it comes to transfusions and cannulations and stuff. He has no problems with that. It's the Desferal he has trouble with, and we have tried switching him to XJade and Deferapone, but he doesn't tolerate them. So what we found help for him is that there's a thing called a worry bear, which you can go on Amazon or something like that. It's like a zip up teddy bear where I say to him, like, write things down for me, and then when you're worried about them, and then pop them in a worry bear, zip it up and give it a hug when you're trying to sleep or whatever. And whenever he comes in for transfusions, I go over and spend time with him, and we pull out whatever his worries were at the time. And I go through and explain it all, which seems to work well for him.
How old is he?
He is 8 or 9.
Oh, that's quite interesting. Not thought about that before, but that's quite interesting. Something to think about.
Yeah, he's quite clued up on it. That's the best way it's worked for him. That the activity the play specialist and I worked through and found to be the best, because he unfortunately initially it all started because he refused to have the Desferal put on his legs, and he started scarring up on his stomach because he overused it, and generally every time it comes to putting the needle on, he gets a bit funny with the family, and quite a lot of it is just around health anxiety and being different from his friends. And that was quite easy for me in a way to be able to explain to him, and giving him that one-on-one time, because I had that time to do it with him, is quite helpful. He also had some input from the psychology team. I think he was allocated to a psychotherapist, and he didn't find that particularly helpful. And I think that was mainly because of not knowing the person and interaction not being as what he's used to, and because obviously we daycare team and us get to know them quite well. We see them like every month, so he gets quite comfortable around us and is able to talk. I think having someone new come in, and obviously they only get a limited amount of sessions and a limited amount of time, that therapeutic relationship can't build up as much. And I guess that is a barrier as well to accessing the right service.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important that, as you say, over time, you've been able to build up a strong therapeutic relationship, a relationship where you're a trusted individual. And then you can come along with a specific idea like the worry bear, and that can really be taken on board, and it can really help. And of course, we might use a sort of version of that in adult work. And that's, I should have said at the start, that's what my focus is. So I work in terms of adult haematology rather than child psychology. But, you know, a worry list or a worry journal, a worry space during the day to write things down. That's something that we might advise people of any age to do, which can be quite helpful.
Yeah, I think we have a hand up from Maureen.
Yeah, hello. I'm a specialist nurse in the community in Luton, and we have quite a lot of thalassemia patients who have transfusions, and I do both pediatrics and adults. I think some of the issues, not necessarily around them coming in. I think sometimes it's around the extended family. It's what's happening outside of their sort of their actual condition. I have more than one family that have 2 or 3 children in the family with thalassemia. And when you have one of those children that they then have a successful bone marrow transplant, the psychological impact on the others that don't get the transplant can be quite significant. And certainly as they get older, the prospects of marriage or not, can be quite worrying for them. And certainly, as has come up several times today, the transition from what we say, leaving the cozy pediatric world into the adult service where, nobody's chasing you, as Chris said, for your appointments, where appointments are very precious. And, the constant when they do transition over is that they're sitting with lots of old people and for their transfusion. And I do say to them, sometimes, one day you will be old too. But those are some of the issues that they sort of I find the children I certainly look after I come across with them.
Yeah, I think it can be a difficult transition from child into adult services. I was actually speaking to someone the other day who's come into the adult services, and he's actually been given quite a lot of support around the transition, and just the idea that he's a lot more sort of on his own, even though the staff are really nice, sort of, having to fend for himself in terms of getting extra food and that kind of thing. So I think it can be a bit of a shock.
Yeah, definitely.
Bit of a shock, and that's something that I guess we can all try and help to ease, but it's still very different. It's a different environment. And yes, around if one member of the family has a transplant that's successful and somebody else isn't able to do that for whatever reason, or isn't at that point, then that can create some difficulties within the family, and it might be helpful to sit down and talk with the family, and that can sometimes happen in therapy, that we might see a family or siblings together.
Ruth, I have a question for you, actually, going on that patient we shared that we did a lot of transition work for. Different psychologists have different methods of therapy. Have I got the gist of it, that you have different techniques or different ways of doing talking?
Yeah, so what I would say is I think there are common factors that underpin all therapists or psychologists, and a lot of that is around what I was talking about today in terms of the importance of the therapeutic relationship, and in terms of building up a good rapport with somebody, and the importance of being as honest as we can be with somebody, as genuine as we can, and as human as we can. So I think, and I would hope, that would underpin, whatever approach we might be using. But then there are different tools or different techniques that we might want to bring in. For somebody, we might want to go perhaps down a more cognitive behavioural therapy, particularly if somebody had a phobia or something like that. Other people, it might be a more sort of explorative, open-ended kind of talking therapy. So there are different approaches, and it's down to the individual person in front of you and what you feel might be most useful for them at that particular point, and checking in with them perhaps and seeing what kind of approach they might be after as well.
Because I'm always mindful of, like, for example, that patient, and they've had a chronic condition, they've been in another trust for X amount of years, had various input from all these different specialists that we've worked together to line up over of us. And I'm always conscious, like, am I providing the same sort of service as what they had? Am I giving them that input?
Mm, mm. And I guess again, that's a bit interesting because they've come across from a paediatric service, which I guess is quite different anyway, you know, to the adult service. As far as I can tell, a lot of it's been about building a very sort of strong relationship with this individual, and you know, a warm relationship, and being able to spend a bit of time, if possible, it is really important. And I think that's something that we at UCH are trying to carry across, particularly at this first point when they've just kind of transitioned, to kind of give them that bit of time.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that patient's probably I've put in a lot of work.
Absolutely, and I think that that's recognised and appreciated. I'm just going to look at the chat if there's. Oh, Tree of Life. Has somebody put a Tree of Life in the chat? That's interesting. Is somebody put that in there? Who's in the meeting?
I think it's Emma.
Are they there? Do they want to talk a bit about Tree of Life, or I can if they'd like. Tree of Life is I guess it's a kind of approach that can be quite useful when it's used with young people or people of any age, actually. And the idea is to help somebody to kind of look at all the different strengths and resources that they might have, and how those strengths and resources and like roots and connections to others might kind of help their tree to be sort of standing there despite the storms that might come along. So somebody in the chat, they've put a picture and there's a kind of completed tree there. And so there's the roots of the tree, which can be to do with where we come from and our family and our culture. And then there's the branch of the tree, which I think might be to do with our strengths and resources, and then the leaves, the people around us. So that can be quite a nice way to work with somebody, and I've certainly done that with people of different ages before. And I guess it's something that, you know, it wouldn't need to be a psychologist who might sort of sketch out a tree with somebody. Does anyone else aware of that kind of approach, or? Thanks for putting it there. Tree of Life, yes.
You're welcome.
Sorry, go ahead.
Someone's put the UKTS have loads of resources and know that Roanna has been working on this in children's books. Not sure when they are to be published, but yeah, that'd be great once we know more about it.
Thanks.
Okay, awesome. Does anyone have any other questions for Ruth or want to share any experiences?
No, that's it.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Ruth.
Your comments. That's no problem.